I'm not going to show this video. At this point, I would imagine that you guys have seen the video. It's been playing everywhere. It's gone viral. The video of George Floyd basically being killed in front of a group of people as he gasped for breath and begged, saying he couldn't breathe. Minneapolis lunatic Officer Derek Chauvin drove his knee. For those who haven't seen this video, Chauvin took his knee and drove it into his throat and held it there for 7 minutes. Now, as he held his knee there for 7 minutes, Floyd begged, pleaded for help. And in pleading for help, he made this point of, I can't breathe. This should sound familiar to you because this was the refrain from Eric Garner, who basically said the same thing as he was also choked on the streets in front of a crowd saying he couldn't breathe. He didn't have a weapon. He was handcuffed. He was on the ground. 3 other officers were pinning him down, meaning they were on him also. And Chauvin, again, knee on throat. The public and the crowd begged him to stop. One of the other firefighters that were there, I think it was a plainclothes firefighter, but who was in the crowd, begged him to check his vitals. He wouldn't even do that. At some point, Floyd stopped moving and the light basically went out in his eyes. And as that happened, even that was insufficient to get Chauvin's knee off of his throat. In which case, he only moved his knee off of his throat after a gurney picked up Floyd. 4 of the cops that were involved in this were fired. The FBI is supposedly looking into the case on whether or not there are going to be civil rights violations. And it is unclear on whether or not any of these guys are going to be actually charged, either from the standpoint of the person who was doing the murder or the other people who were just standing around watching him commit that murder. It's unknown. We have a history in our community of cops being able to basically skate without having any consequences. And not even just cops. I mean, if you're talking about Zimmerman, people, Black lives are expendable to some degree. And that shows itself when you have governments, local governments, that either lose cases seemingly on purpose or just don't bring cases at all, or a slap on the wrist for basically removing somebody off the face of this earth. It is sufficient just to say I was terrified, and so anything that I do at that point is fair game. Forge check. Garner loose cigarettes. And these crimes were sufficient in order for them to lose their lives by these lunatics. Various people, of course, wringing their hands. Now, no, nobody is going to put any real substantial changes through. Nobody is, that didn't take place either under the black president. It's certainly not going to take place under this president. And so the best that you're going to get is people wringing their hands, and you may get somebody going to jail, or you may get somebody prosecuted. Maybe. That's not even necessarily a given, which is saying something in and of itself. But I want to get to the hand wringing for the moment. Now, one of the people who's wringing her hands, Amy Klobuchar, mean girl. Now, Klobuchar is apparently nasty to her staff. That's the word on the street when you have your ear to the ground here in D.C. But Klobuchar also used to be a prosecutor, just like Kamala Harris used to be a prosecutor. Now, Klobuchar didn't get a huge amount of shit for being a prosecutor. It was only towards the end where a case that she was involved in, where they basically put somebody in prison who probably should not have been in prison, especially when you find out that the evidence that was used to put him there was basically dodgy, and other people have recanted their stories. So, mean girl, Amy Klobuchar, comes out and give a tepid comment. Now, just so we're clear, in the same way that I find this notion of, okay, these guys are fired, massively insufficient. There should have been arrest. Again, I'm not going to show the video. The video is difficult to watch, but basically a knee is put on the individual's throat for 7 minutes as he pleads and begs for help, saying, I can't breathe. It's basically a human being dying, with other human beings being entirely unempathetic to the fact that that person is dying. Basic psychopaths. The people went out by the thousands last night and also tonight. Now, last night was a peaceful protest. That peaceful protest was met by violence from the police force, rubber bullets, stun grenades apparently, and also mountains or oceans and oceans of tear gas. Tonight, it was not necessarily a peaceful protest. The cops came out in force once again with the same armaments, add in flashbang or bang grenades. But the crowd basically used the purview of the mob to dispense righteous indignation, and did so by basically destroying cop cars, by attacking the precinct itself that was at the heart of this kind of issue, but also destroying and looting stores. So this was not this kind of kumbaya get together. People were pissed off for obvious reasons. Now, Klobuchar gives a milquetoast comment. Let's go to her comment for the moment. This is important. She says, "We've heard his repeated calls for help. We heard him say over and over again that he could not breathe. And now we have seen yet another horrifying and gut-wrenching instance of an African-American man dying. Every single person in every single community in this country deserves to feel safe. As the mayor of Minneapolis noted, this tragic loss of life calls for immediate action. There must be a complete and thorough investigation into what occurred, and those involved in this incident must be held accountable. Justice must be served for this man, and the family for this justice must be served for the community." Look, justice doesn't exist. I know people use this kind of expansive language when they're talking about it. But if you have a situation where Eric Garner was choked to death by a cop on the streets for something that was basically insignificant, with a group of people around him, with a crowd of people basically telling the cop not to kill that person because it looks like you're about to murder that person, and you have basically an echo of that today. Garner took place, what, like 10 years ago? So how can you have any context of justice when you have basically the same thing taking place? The same systems that were in place that allowed this particular thing to take place perpetuate themselves. When you go to issues of poverty, you go to issues of race, you go to issues of the way the criminal justice system engages with African Americans. I have no fucking clue on even how to deal with that part. But the poverty thing is a big deal. I mean, when you're talking about forging a check or loose cigarettes, I mean, these are things that basically put people in line for bad ends out of issues of economics. The key thing that you need to understand about Klobuchar's letter is that there is no basically assertive words. Meaning, we saw the video. The cop killed him. Well, killed is not in here. Every single person in the community in this country deserves to be safe. Yes, I understand they deserve to be safe, but this guy wasn't safe. He was choked to death on the streets with a large number of people watching as he panted that he couldn't breathe. Klobuchar gives a tepid response. Now, the catch is, maybe there's a reason she's given a tepid response. We've seen yet another horrifying and gut-wrenching instance of an African-American man dying. No. We've seen another horrifying and gut-wrenching instance of a cop murdering another African-American man. You have to say that a little stronger, not these weak words. Well, why do you think Klobuchar is so weak on this? Now, Klobuchar was probably the only other person in the race that was more radioactive, or that might have been as radioactive to African Americans as Pete Buttigieg. Now, this wasn't necessarily just for no reason. Usually there are reasons behind these things, especially if we're looking at people's records and we don't necessarily like those records. When you look up Klobuchar's record in Minneapolis, because this is her state after all, and Alan McLeod, he comes on our show all the time. This is in Mint Press. I'm just going to read it. Klobuchar has called for a complete and thorough outside investigation. Is that part? Right. She's called for a complete and thorough outside investigation into what occurred, and those involved in the incident must be held accountable. However, this is unlikely to occur in no small part because of Klobuchar herself and the precedent she set while serving as the state's chief prosecutor between 1999 and 2007. In that time, she declined to bring charges against more than 24 officers who had killed dozens of civilians who had killed civilians while on duty, including Chauvin himself, the officer who shot and killed Wayne Reyes in 2006, and who would later go on to kill more civilians in a uniform, and of course, kill George Floyd in the video the other day. Let me repeat that. Amy Klobuchar, in her job as chief prosecutor in Minneapolis, Minnesota, from 1999 to 2007, she declined to bring charges against more than 24 officers that had killed civilians while they were on duty. One of those officers was Chauvin, the gentleman or the person, Derek Chauvin, who ended up killing Wayne Reyes in 2006, will later shoot more civilians, but of course also George Floyd, the person, the gentleman who was just killed by Chauvin. Meaning if Klobuchar did her job, this might not have never taken place. I can tell you this. I don't know who won't be the vice president. Don't know who will be the vice president, but I can tell you who won't. I can tell you who won't. I will bet any amount of money that Klobuchar is not going to be the VP after that. That's utterly gross. Meaning, because she was so lenient and lax on cops and their killing of civilians, the person who ends up killing another civilian just so happens to be the outrage. And it's an outrage because of how flagrant he killed George Floyd. But the key point here is he had killed people before, and Klobuchar basically was given free passes. And in giving that free pass, that person went on to kill again and again. This time, just so happens, caught on video camera with his knee on somebody's throat for 7 minutes. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all. Klobuchar is going nowhere after this. She may as well go home. Her vice president pick time period has expired.